Welcome to episode 7 of Believe in TCU. I'm Zion Trammell, and today I'm joined by Ian Napetian and Seth Dowdle. Today, we're going to talk about TCU and SMU, the embarrassing loss the Horned Frogs took in Dallas over the weekend. But we got to do like a mental health check-in here with you guys. How are we doing? Are we hanging in there?
We're chugging along, man. We're chugging along. We're like the last link of the train, man. And oh goodness, it's been a tough last couple of days. And I also know both of our NFL teams lost too. So
We're rebounding though. This is a rebound week. We're gonna rebound just ourselves, us three. I'm not talking about any other sports figures. I'm just us as a unit. We're gonna rebound mentally somehow because we're just not gonna think about this anymore. I feel like that's just the healthy thing. The healthy thing would just be to walk away from sports in general, but unfortunately, I feel like I'm unable to do that.
Yeah, we've put ourselves in a position where we are no longer able to do that. We have to live it and we have to talk about it. But a couple more days and we can move on from this game forever. But we have to talk about it. TCU took on SMU over the weekend, and
I'm sure it went great.
yeah, it went great. They put up 42 points, as Seth mentioned moments before recording. You'd
Six
think, hey,
touchdowns. That's awesome.
yeah, you think no other context, you think, hey, TCU put up 42 points. They probably won this game, right? Nope. They gave up more points in this game than they did in the national championship by one. They lost 66-42 in Dallas in the penultimate game of the Iron Skillet rivalry that TCU themselves ended. And they went into Dallas and got absolutely destroyed. There are so many negatives about this game, so many things that went wrong in just about every facet of the game that you could possibly think of. But I'll just start with this. Really, the big thing for me was the points off turnovers. Uh, TCU played pretty clean football through the first 3 weeks as far as not turning the ball over that much. Josh Hoover hadn't thrown an interception, and he threw two, I believe, on Saturday. And then there was also a fumble six, a fumble that went to the 1 yard line. I mean, they completely took themselves out of the game with turnovers and allowing points to be scored off of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
it was
was pretty dire.
But
Sorry,
Hey,
Seth. It was
no,
it
you're
was
good.
pretty dire all around.
We had the exact. We were saying the exact same words.
we
Yeah, it
we
was
were.
pretty ridiculous. It was pretty dire. It was pretty. I mean, it was the worst way to start the game was that fumble, the scoop and score, and then the punt return. There was a lot of hidden yardage that SMU had. I think TCU ended up outgaining them in the end. But there was a lot of hidden yardage, and it was those yards where it was a kickoff return, long kickoff returns, the scoop and scores, stuff like that, where SMU obviously outplayed TCU in the end, and they just came out. They looked like they wanted to be there more than TCU did. I don't know. I mean, I heard that it was probably the best week in practice. That's what I heard after the game. I heard that they had a really good week in practice. I mean, but it looked like they're practicing against themselves. So again, it's always very easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very true.
It's very funny to hear that sometimes. And I mean, even you think about it, you're like, all right, but are we the best competition? Or are we playing at our highest level in practice all the time? Right. And I mean, I think that's a conversation for another day, but everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. TCU struggled in every facet of the game. I mean, that score doesn't, the 42 points doesn't even really mean 42 points the way we put it up, throughout the game. I think this running game is awful. That's nothing new. That's nothing that nobody else doesn't know already. But our rushing game is awful. Our rushing defense is awful. We allowed 289 rushing yards to UCF last week, and now this week we allowed 238. So back-to-back weeks of over 200 yards rushing allowed. And then again, we couldn't, it was hard for us to get pressure. And then our offensive line, I mean, it's just this game, I did not see this coming at all. At all.
Yeah, I didn't either. Because I watched SMU for 3 weeks before this look pretty inept. I mean, they barely beat Nevada, who is not good. They play Houston Christian, obviously, so they, wipe the floor with them, and then they lose to BYU at home. And apparently BYU is pretty good. So I don't know if that was, a at the time I didn't think BYU was great, but I mean they just beat Kansas State. So, but and then they come out here and then they do this. And well, I guess it was somewhat expected in terms of I expected them to be able to move the ball because I did not have any confidence that TCU would be able to get a stop. But I didn't have. But what I was confident, or at least, was that TCU would be able to go punch for punch at least a little bit on offense. But I think the defensive struggles have gotten in the offense's head a little bit because now they feel like they have to be perfect, and they do have to be perfect. And the second that they're not, like they fumble on, they have a scoop and score, and it's 10-0. It feels like the game's over at that point, but that's not how it should feel. But everyone on the sidelines, like, well, they're not going to be able to get a stop, and everyone in the stands is like that as well. And so then you see a game like this for Josh Hoover where he feels like he has to be Superman. And I think he turned the ball over 5 times, and because I don't think this is indicative on Josh Hoover's. This is a bit of a ramble, but how good Josh Hoover is. I think Josh Hoover is really good, but he's on a team where he has to be perfect every single time, and that's not what you want from a sophomore quarterback.
Yeah, a guy that's like, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, sorry. It's not what you want from a guy that's a sophomore quarterback, just like you said. And I don't think Josh Hoover is that guy that can be a perfect quarterback. He needs to be in a system that allows him to have some wiggle room. Obviously, not everything's going to be perfect, right? But again, I mean, you can equate it to baseball. If you don't get any run support, your pitcher's got to pitch in your perfect game to come away with a win. And again, it's a bit of the opposite here, where because our defense can't get a stop, if our offense can't do anything offensively, then you're sitting here like, all right, we're sitting duck here as a team, right? If our defense just can't get a stop and then we're getting shut down offensively, it's the worst two kinds of things that you can have, at least for this type of TCU team. But again, just like you mentioned, Seth, this isn't anything against Josh Hoover at all. This game, he is not the problem. I think the problem is the defense, and this offensive line is just killing Josh Hoover right now.
Another thing too is he's playing in an awesome offensive system. I saw a thing. TCU is one of the teams that runs the most play action and RPO in the country, but that does not work because they cannot run the ball. So if it's play action, the defense is not going to buy it on the run because they know that you're not going to. If it's an RPO, they're not going to buy it on the run because they know that you're not going to. You're going to throw it because this team throws it like 50 times a game. So,
yeah, Josh Hoover, Cam Cook ran the ball 14 times for 24 yards. I mean, nobody is going to buy that if you're trying to run play action, run RPO. I mean, if you can't even average more than 2.5 yards per carry, I mean, he averaged 1.7. I mean, that's there's nothing you can do with that. And even as TCU saw last week, when they're playing ahead, they can't run the football and chew clock and burn and sustain long drives because the defenses are able to stop the run. And so not only did TCU struggle with the lead yesterday, but they've dug themselves in such a massive hole that Josh Hoover had to try to play perfect, and he couldn't, and it just became too much for him to try to overcome. But just a quick side note on that 4th and inches with the fumble 6, what was the play call there? I don't know about you guys, but I feel like that was not
triple option, a little speed option is what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
Looked like there could have been a pitch there at some point.
When you needed a couple inches.
I also think he was down, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it may not have changed the outcome of the game, but yeah, it did kind of look like he was down, and that was kind of a thing that the penalties TCU had, I think, 12 or 14 penalties, something outrageous, and I know
Two of those
it
were by the
got
head coach, so I mean, I don't know if we can take those off the board.
true, and
135 yards and penalties, though.
yeah, that adds up
Yeah.
quickly, and Sonny Dykes found himself ejected from the game because he had two unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, and I mean, man, I understand people are, if they want to say, oh, the referee, there were some bad calls, but I just don't think that's any excuse for the way that TCU played. I mean, it was really, really bad, but I was pretty shocked to see Sonny Dykes get ejected. And of course, of all teams, it's against SMU.
Well, it was ridiculous. It was the most like of all the people on that sideline that need to have a little bit of composure right now, it's him. And it was like the first two plays of the second half.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and he gets into the refs because they call back a touchdown return on TCU's on the opening kick of the second half. And then TCU runs a couple plays or like maybe one more play and he's chewing him again and then they kick him out. And maybe it wasn't warranted, but at the same time, man, come on, keep your cool. Like it's especially in this building, they hate you here. And they gave him hell for it as he was walking out, obviously, which they had every right to. Um, and it's just like now you're going to leave this game in the hand of Kendall Briles. What are we doing?
Yeah, it was very yeah, I think especially for Sonny Dykes, like we've seen Sonny Dykes get animated several times. And I like seeing him fight for his players and things like that, stick up for his team. But at the same time, right, you're coming out of halftime. I assume you've had a chance to maybe decompress a little bit. Even if you haven't, you're an experienced coach that needs to kind of set the tone here. If him getting thrown out was a bit of the all right, we're done. That's a bit of the nail in the coffin. Because we come out of this halftime already down. And then the one guy, just like you said, Seth, that's supposed to keep his composure, the one guy that all eyes are on for this game because of his history with SMU and now TCU, loses his cool. And I'm not, I mean, I get it. It's frustrating. I mean, I was frustrated watching it. He's got to be frustrated coaching it. But you've got to be able to just compartmentalize some of that. And unfortunately, Sonny Dykes just let it get a little too far out of hand. And yeah, I mean, this was the perfect storm, I think, for SMU. Everything that could have gone wrong for TCU went wrong.
Yeah, it worked out really well for SMU in just about every single way. It just, again, I mean, Seth, you mentioned it, and you guys mentioned it. I don't think anyone saw this outcome happening at all. I mean, I would like to think that TCU lost by 1 point to a pretty good UCF team. I mean, I think UCF is going to be competitive in the Big 12, and it just came down to bad second half execution. But in this game, it just was completely, I mean, it just looked like an entirely different team. And there's just, again, so many things that were extremely frustrating. The getting them into third and long multiple times, and SMU's able to pick it up or score a touchdown off of it. I mean, I think they had a 3rd and 11 in the second half, and they scored a touchdown off it. And then
on runs, like it's not even like they were throwing passes. They would do
Yeah.
like a QB run for no reason.
It makes no sense. And they did nothing to stop. They made 0 adjustments from last week. I mean, multiple times you got 3 guys up front, 5 or 6 guys in the box, and you can't do that when you're not able to stop the run. If you have good defensive line up front, yeah, maybe you can get away with it, but they just got shredded by UCF, and they're doing the same exact thing against SMU. They see that, they're like, "All right, bet. I'm just going to run right down your throat and good luck trying to stop it."
Oh, you're muted.
I got caught with the mutie. My bad, guys. My bad. Last week, whenever they they lose to UCF, and you mentioned it, Zion. I think UCF's going to be pretty good, or like competitive at least. And so like if you lose that game by 1, like of course the way you lost it was pretty demoralizing, but if you looked like, it wouldn't have surprised me like if we look like 6 weeks from now, and like that's like just like, oh, UCF's pretty good, TCU lost, like that's a respectable loss, and TCU's playing, they've rebounded, they've won a couple of games, right? They rebounded, they beat SMU the next week. That's kind of what my expectation was, because I mean, I saw that video of Josh Hoover on Carter Boys after the UCF game, and I was like, that's a mature-ish sign, right? That they're going to come out and they're going to try and be competitive this week because they're going to flush this, and they clearly did not flush it. It was clearly still there, much like the Colorado game was last year. I don't know if that UCF game and now this game is ever going to leave their heads, and like I mean, I don't know what you do about that, but good teams are able to rebound from stuff like that. But I don't know how you rebound from this. This is tough. If they do, good on them.
Yeah, TCU again needs to make sure that these last 2 games don't derail their season, right? I mean, I completely feel that the loss against Colorado last year derailed the whole season from the get-go. That's just what it felt like. That was hanging over our heads for the entirety of the season, and kind of same thing here again. These aren't just losses where, hey, you know what? They were just better than us today, or this. I mean, the SMU one kind of felt that way to a degree, but we also had 5 turnovers, right? And but these were demoralizing losses. These were, punches below the belt. These were these losses felt like a punch in the gut, and to the point where you're like, all right, something needs to change. And you start looking to point fingers, like back-to-back losses like this. I'm praying it doesn't do anything to the team chemistry and at least things with the coaching staff and pointing fingers. I mean, I'm sure I've seen on Twitter already, there's a lot of people calling for certain things, and it's just like, all right, let's take it one day at a time. Let's try to rebound next week, see what we can do against Kansas. It's a good opportunity to bounce back the same way this was a great opportunity, but to bounce back against UCF. But again, it's almost like you just got to tell the guys, yeah, we lost 66-42. That's it. Move on. Don't dwell. You can't afford to keep thinking about this loss and the previous week's loss to UCF.
It'll say a good deal about how this team, I think this Kansas game is going to be a pretty good barometer, because even for Kansas too, Kansas is coming off I don't know if y'all saw how Kansas lost to West Virginia, but that is demoralizing too. And Kansas is in the gutter, and TCU is now in a gutter. And so this is going to be kind of a make or break game for both of these teams' seasons next week on Saturday at 2:30 on ESPN Plus. That means that no one sees this game. No one's going to see it. No one's going to see it. And that's all that matters.
No one's going to be there because they don't have a home stadium. So we might get like 10 eyes on this game.
And that's fine. That's perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect for Sonny Dykes and Kendall Briles and Andy Avalos and Mark Tomerdahl and their job status, I'd say, too.
Yep.
I think a lot of people left this game with more questions than answers, and I don't necessarily think TCU has those answers right now. But I agree. I mean, this is a game where you lose this game, the season's a lost cause, in my opinion. Losing 3 in a row, falling to 2 and 3 against a reeling Kansas team is not a good look, regardless if it's on the road or not. But I think, Ian, you make a great point. It's a chance for them to just try to flush it, which I think they've struggled with in the past, and that's it's tough. I mean, losing a game, it can weigh a lot on you, especially as a young player, but they just got to scrap it and look ahead and try to get a win, because the season isn't over yet. We're still very early in the season. A lot of things can happen over the course of the season, and if TCU can find a way to look good next week, and hey, maybe there's some optimism for the rest of the season. Do you guys feel like that is still a possibility? Like this team can still show something as the season goes on?
I think that it is important these next two games because it's Kansas and Houston next, right? Kansas, Houston. Okay. Yeah. You got to win both of these. If you win both of these, your bowl chances skyrocket. Because I mean, you get Utah later, you get Arizona later, you get Oklahoma State later. So it's this kind of like, are we chalking those up as 3 losses now? Like, I'm not willing to go as far as that because this is football and stuff happens. Yep. But I'll just tell you this: Utah sure likes to play a whole lot like UCF does. They will. Oklahoma State has theoretically one of the best running backs in the country, and so it's just you look at the games and you're like, okay, well, if you just watched what UCF and SMU were able to do, then I feel like they're just running a simple inside zone, and that seems to be the death of them. But I think if you can beat Kansas, who also has a very mobile quarterback, which has proved to be a problem for TCU, then you should be fine. Then I think you can beat Houston. So if you go into Salt Lake City 4-2, I feel a lot better.
Yeah, these next 2 games are the most important games of the season for TCU. This is where your season is either made or it's broken. You need to get both of these wins. If you don't, you're really putting yourself up against the wall there. But yeah, no, I mean, there's not much else to say other than TCU needs to just sweep these next 2 weeks over in Kansas than at home against Houston. I definitely feel better about the game at home against Houston. Going on the road to Kansas, even though it's not where Kansas typically plays, it's in Arrowhead, which I think is going to be an awesome atmosphere. I think Kansas is going to be hyped to be playing in that atmosphere. TCU just needs to be very mindful of what these next 2 weeks means in the grand scheme of things. Because if you win these next 2 games, not only does your season look better, but then you have a little bit of momentum, a little bit of self-confidence going into that game against Utah, right? Then if you can piece together a good fight into that, and also not to mention after these 2 weeks too, we have a bye week. So it's kind of like, all right, try to get these 2 wins, get to the bye week, reset, focus on Utah. You have 2 weeks to just focus on Utah, at least maybe more so from a defensive standpoint of trying to figure out how you're going to stop the run. Again, just like Seth mentioned, you look at the schedule, the teams are playing, they match up really well against us. We know exactly what they're going to try to exploit. And now for us, it's a matter of trying to study that and figure that out to prepare. So
it's a perfectly placed bye week. To have 2 weeks to prepare for Utah will be huge. But guys, we did it. We talked about the game. No, we didn't completely lose our minds talking about this TC versus SMU game.
Yep.
And I'm glad we were able to do that. But
it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. We
not bad.
vented, we got it all out.
Let's do it again tomorrow.
We move on.
Let's talk about the game again tomorrow.
Oh god.
Yeah. I could let's do it. We're on to Kansas.
Let's talk about let me just mention this real fast. I just want to say this. What's crazy is that they're 2-2, right? It feels like they're like 3-9 right now. But I mean, there's still a path to win the conference. I'm just gonna say that. Anyway, bye. I'm leaving now.
That's crazy.
Well, technically, yes. There is a path, but
I will be saying that for as long as there's a path.
It's in TCU's hands.
It is right now, actually. Technically, it is.
So you're saying there's a chance, they didn't really put themselves in a great position to do that. Luckily, this game doesn't count as a conference loss. It just, it's just a loss against
It just
a
makes you feel
one of
really
our hated
terrible about
teams.
yourself, which might be
Yeah.
even worse.
Yeah, it came against a team we hate. So,
I'm not
you
mad. I'm
know.
just disappointed. That was
Yeah,
what this loss was.
yeah, we're the disappointed parents right now. Very disappointed in TCU. But later in the week, we'll preview TCU versus Kansas. That game will be on Saturday on ESPN Plus in front of 100 people. So that should be a fun one. But we'll preview that later on in the week. But that'll wrap things up for this episode of Believe in TCU. For Seth Dowdle and Ian Nepetian, I'm Zion Trammell. Thanks for tuning in. You can follow us on Instagram at Believe in TCU. You can subscribe to our YouTube with the same name and listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, really wherever you get your podcasts at Believe in TCU. But thanks for tuning in to today's episode, and we'll see you guys next time. And as always, go Frogs.